Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, just when the song gets intense, you know we have to stop it and start the session. Welcome everyone to the Stoa. I'm Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa. And today we have a session, and this is sort of going to be a launch of a potential series at the Stoa around Earth regeneration. And another kind of, we have a Sense Maker in Residence series where there's like a series that happens over a month. Someone comes in to make sense of the world. We're going to do something similar, call it like a communal podcast incubator or something, where people come in around a topic like Earth regeneration and invite guests and kind of leverage the Stoa ecology in order to embark on interesting explorations. And so this is the launch of this series, and it is going to be with Freya Yost and Luea Ritter. And if I mispronounce both of your names, you can jump in later and correct me. I will read their bios to formally introduce them to the Stoa space. Freya is a strategist, writer, and activist focused on the intersection of human rights and the climate crisis. She was previously the COO of Common Earth, regenerative development program at the Commonwealth of Nations, and has over a decade of experience working with Indigenous groups on food sovereignty. And Luea is a process steward, action researcher, and co-founder of Collective Transitions and the Nile Journeys. Her work weaves trauma and healing work, leadership and organizational development, and earth-based wisdom to cultivate and maintain capacities in individuals and collectives. Through her work, she has developed a high sensitivity for context-based cultural and social dynamics. So obviously, two awesome, cool people, very Stoa-like and friendly. So I'm very happy to have both of them here. So how today's going to work, I'm going to hand it over to them. They're going to kind of talk about the topic at hand and the potential series, and then we'll pivot to the Q&A. I will ask them, probably warm up the question, but just start throwing your questions in the chat anytime. I'll call on you, unmute yourself. If you don't want to be on YouTube, indicate that, and I'll read your question on your behalf. There's one more thing. We might end like a couple of minutes early today because we have a high pitch session right at the hour. So just indicating that. So that being said, I will take whoever wants to be taken first. Welcome to the Stoa. And I think, yeah.
Thanks so much, Peter. Yeah, we're thrilled to be here, and it's lovely to see all of you guys. And yeah, we were just honored to be invited into this space and excited to get to know the community a little bit better. And both Luea and I have been working on this sort of topic of Earth regeneration for many years now. And we're excited to get into what it means to us and what we've noticed in the field. And one thing I'll just sort of speak to, because I know it's a common theme in the Stoa, is that we both spend a lot of time thinking about how Earth regeneration relates directly to our sort of personal development and the interaction between our development as humans and the practice of Earth regeneration that we work on in sort of more activist spaces. Yeah, go ahead, Luea.
Yeah, just also really happy to be in this space with you all. And I feel there's so much around this topic to explore, to speak of, to share. I think in the preparation for this topic also, and for today, and also that what kind of is as a potential lurking around for a continuation, is also what does it mean to us and what does it actually summoning us to. So that's also really something, not only what the books say or what some frameworks say or how it is put there or there in practice, but how is it in this time we live in also, what is it summoning us to? And that's also something that we have strongly explored. And yeah, it's in a way our inquiry question. So maybe we can speak a bit to that also. And then I just find it really exciting to hear the questions and seeing how this actually weaves a further carpet together.
Luea and I have recently been having a lot of conversations. The term regeneration is becoming popular, especially in the sustainability space, obviously. And one of the things that we feel that it is not, for example, is regenerative agriculture or something like that. So when Luea and I refer to regeneration and earth regeneration, we're actually speaking to something that's much more broad, much more about a state of being in the world, much more about a sort of a new paradigm of being. And actually, if you look into the regenerative space or the regenerative development space, you see a whole sort of spectrum of different fields of practice, from permaculture and regenerative ag to business leadership, to spiritual practices, a lot of sort of living system science dimensions in the regenerative space, complex adaptive systems, systems change, restorative justice, stuff like that. So it's very multidimensional, the space. And yet the term is becoming very popularized to sort of, I think from what I can tell, it's sort of becoming a term that means like at the cutting edge of sustainability, when I think that would be a limitation to what Luea and I, for example, have been studying and practicing.
Yeah, and it feels also to me important to name that it's actually a very old, ancient technology. So it's not something new, but it's actually, I would say, especially Western societies, to kind of remember literally and rewire an ancient technology or ancient technologies into and with future technologies. So also not to claim that there is anything new to it. It's just like becoming aware again and allowing it, actually probably even memories in our DNA, to become again more manifest, more active, more embodied, and more explicit between each other, but also not only in the regenerative crowd, so-called, but also how I show up every day with my neighbors, with my friends, with my family, with how I treat myself. So it's also, that was also in our conversation very present, of how we are actually tapping into something that has always been here, and acknowledging therefore also something that may have been denied for a long time, or has maybe even led us to be in this very moment of planetary history in a way. But also the potential, what does it mean actually not to take it for granted, but also to reactivate it from a more conscious place, and reclaiming it actually back into our current reality.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And one of the, maybe some of you are thinking, well, this sounds so abstract. What are they actually talking about? And I think that regeneration is actually not abstract at all. It's in fact always rooted in place and in the unique potential of that place. And I think that a lot of especially in the development, climate change, sustainability space, regeneration has become critical because of the sort of unhealthy and ingrained patterns of one-size-fits-all solutions in the development space, top-down development, sort of funneling ready-made technologies into the developing, sort of the global south, and expecting change to come from that, when really regeneration is about reconnecting to place and remembering, as Luea says, a right relationship with that place. And it's always unique, as every community and sort of geography is unique. and therefore it will take on its own character. It will have its own sort of spirit, if you will. And that doesn't mean that doesn't have direction to it. It does have directionality. I mean, we're sort of in this poly crisis, if you will, now that's very much global. And yet it's sort of like we have to find that intersection between these local site-specific, place-sourced responses to this polycrisis and a more meta-level sort of understanding, because we are very much in this sort of globally connected world. And so regeneration is also tracing and studying and upgrading its sort of response modes based on that interplay between the hyper-local, site-specific responses to the polycrisis and the sort of collective meta-level understanding of what that polycrisis is, what its character is. So I think it's not about a set of solutions to a set of problems. In fact, I've studied with a specific tradition that comes from Regenesis group frameworks, and they actually have established principles, which are, again, it's sort of like the work manifests itself in all of these different ways, depending on the uniqueness of, the specifics of place and community. And yet there are these underlying principles that can be shared and learned from, sort of like all snowflakes are unique and different, except they're also all snowflakes. And some of these principles, just to name a few, are, I think we've said, interconnection, believing that, every goal must be beneficial to a larger world and should not prioritize the health of one subsystem while undermining the health of another. And I think that there's also embedded in regeneration this component of enabling a sort of an ongoing process by which capability and capacity are developed and can sort of regenerate themselves as they go along, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what just comes up when you speak is I have a background as also craniosacral therapist, and there it's so fundamental. One of the principles, each system has its own health and path through healing, ingrained, and knows about it. So regeneration for me is also speaking about the system, whatever it is, being it a plot of land, a community, a whole country, or a bioregion, knows in its core what it actually, how to regenerate itself. So it doesn't need an outsider to, sometimes it needs someone to hold space for it, to make it visible and mirror it to the system, and just be there gently to kind of steward it. I mean, not just one person, of course, but like a group of people. But the system knows, and it's just more the question, are the preconditions in a way supported and established that the system can regenerate itself naturally? And I mean, if we look into nature, how it is metabolizing itself on an ongoing basis, there is so much artistry and power in that. And it's more the question, can we enter in that relationality that Freya spoke of, to actually support and co-create with that power that is existing, and the system knowing what it actually needs. And are we open and receptive enough and allowing to listen to these impulses, being it with the land itself, or to the community, to the collective body that shapes a certain place or area. So for me, it's also about being in relation at any scale, and with any visible or invisible elements of a system.
So that's really interesting, because like this puts, like, for example, the climate crisis in a completely different light. It's almost like, it's not like, oh, now, these are the sets of problems that we need to fight and conquer and eliminate, because actually we're talking about a deeper developmental process, right? So what comes up for me is just like integral theory, because I've been reading it lately, in Ken Wilber, where he discusses, there are hierarchies of dominance, but there are also hierarchies of growth and development. I'm forgetting, maybe Peter will chime in and remind me, but like one is highly problematic and destructive, and the other, actually, it's always about transcend and include. So if you take that perspective to the polycrisis that we're in, or just let's take one part of the polycrisis, which is the climate crisis, it's, we can ask ourselves, what purpose did this serve in this world, right? What has this crisis prompted us into, and how can we sort of compost the learnings of that struggle and sort of transcend and include and take this evolutionary leap, either at individual levels, but also collective and global levels, right? And in that sense, the climate crisis becomes more of an initiation, right? A collective planetary initiation. And when you think of it that way, masterminding your way into sets of solutions is partial, is an incomplete sort of response. So that's where I would take what Luea was speaking to.
I love this. It's an initiation, a global initiation, because it's in a way saying that we are actually on track with things dying. And the question is, do we allow it? And do we allow then actually that compass can come from it, that leads us into a next cycle of birth, ripening, maturing, growing up, and where there's probably then another cycle of decay, and kind of acknowledging these different seasons that we also go through as humanity, without, of course, neglecting the pain and the suffering and the grief that this also requires to be with and to presence and to hold space for. And that I find very, I feel there is a lot of creativity and also a new muscle as a global citizenship required to, or maybe not a new muscle, but one that we haven't trained for a long time. How do we stay with stuff that is uncomfortable, that is intense, that is challenging, that is going into the core of questioning our existence and how we show up individually as well as collectively. And for me, regeneration is I wouldn't say a hope, but it gives me at least some, as a kind of like, almost, how do you call that in English, the rail, a line to hold on when you kind of climb in a territory, in a mountain that is so steep that you actually fear to fall. But how is there something that maybe can give us some support along the way, in moments where we may not see anymore where we step, and do we have some kind of red line that we can follow, red threads that also built upon what our ancestors, and I call upon all our ancestors here, because otherwise we would not be here if they would not have known how to ongoingly again and again be in a regenerative pattern. And then as humanity we would have stopped a long time ago. So there is some knowledge in us that I'm also really, the question is, are we ready to become this kind of co-evolutionary participants in that? And no matter where we are, no matter what kind of range of action field we are working in.
Yeah, one interesting thing about working in the climate change space and also the social justice space is that, rightly so, there's a sense of urgency. the crisis, people are dying, wars are ongoing and never ending. There are so many evil and terrible things going on in the world, and so there's this sort of justified sense of urgency, and yet urgency is also related to the problem space. It's like really tied to the problem space. And one of the practices in the regenerative development tradition is to not work from the problem space, but to work from the potential space or the opportunity space. And the reason for that is because when we go into the problem space, the problem context, and start to analyze all of the sort of problematic, complex, interconnected dimensions of this space, we get caught in the past. We are actually, our work and our thinking gets stuck in the past, and therefore the thinking that we do remains partially in that past problematic space. But when you flip it around and you intentionally work from trying to identify and sense into the highest sort of stage of potential that is available at any given moment in any given place, right? Because it's always different. And if you sense into what that opportunity or that potential space is, new thinking is born. That's actually what you can stimulate a creative response towards problem solving rather than getting caught in past problematic thinking. At least this is the idea, and I have practiced it in several sort of like on-site examples, and it's been incredibly transformative to work that way. And that's totally opposite to like the mainstream narrative on like we need to move quickly, we need to roll out solutions, and yet like I feel like technology would have fixed these problems by now if they were fixable. And so we need to be able to access psychological and intellectual and different spaces within us and within each other to call upon new capabilities and modes of addressing what we have no idea how to address, right? Like this is not some easy fit. Like anyone who says like we've got the solution to XYZ like has not understood like how complex it is, or has not like looked into the interconnected meta crisis that we're in. And therefore, it's really, humility is really, really important. The vulnerability and the sort of opening up to being wrong, that's also part of how I see regeneration and regenerative practice.
Yeah, it's in a way speaking to daring to fail and know that even our failures can be a supportive ground for what next to come. It's this kind of cyclical approach to things. What I find really important in all that, this is a work to not do alone, or you can't do alone. The regeneration happens always in relationship with and for me, just even that space here, what the Stoa offers is in a way a space where we can regenerate our thoughts and that then take in our different contexts, but it's a place where we can come together, weave, maybe even remember, get inspired from, look at the potential that lies between our thoughts and on the inspirations that we hear from each other across also different places. So as much as it is, like Freya said, very focused on context and place, it is also about learning from each other across different contexts, what has worked in one context and what may be an inspirational source to try out somewhere else, and where is the local, maybe even storyline so clearly different that it needs another approach. So it's I find that the beauty and also the challenge of like each time a new bringing what I know from before and letting it go right away again and again. It's like kind of being this curious, innocent, also ignorant being each time anew, and finding trust in that, not knowing also. And at the same time also bring knowledge from other places or other situations or experiences with us. So that small dance, between what's ancient and here, as well as what's still to come and what we have no idea of.
Obviously, there's like very little social scaffolding for this kind of work. Be ignorant. It's like all the things that like you're not supposed to be in your professional life, right? We're trying to actually cultivate and grow into a professional practice in a lot of ways. And this is one of the great challenges of working on regeneration is, you can go into really advanced sort of sustainability conversations and discourse and projects. And in those spaces, yes, there's like a high amount of sort of literacy for these topics. But if you just want to go into, sort of business as usual, these are very controversial, triggering ways of looking at the world. And therefore your personal practice becomes incredibly relevant and important. Otherwise you have no measure of success. You have no measure of how you're impacting any given situation. And there's also a metaphysical dimension of this where, and I think a lot of the people working in the regenerative space, like something happened and then they like ended up, going in, having, beginning to work in different ways. Like in my case, for example, where, working in a more sort of business as usual context on the topics of climate change and social justice and human rights, I became very disenchanted with how, change from within the system. And because of that frustration, because of that restraint, I actually ended up like mixing up the metrics, my sort of like ways of evaluating how I was being impactful. And I got into sort of a metaphysical dimension of saying, okay, so maybe it's not working on these terms, but if I switch the terms and switch out like the terrain in which I'm counting my impact metrics, then all of a sudden stuff is like making a lot of sense. And then once that new picture comes into consciousness, comes into awareness, there is or sort of a leap in consciousness, and that's tied to a leap in development as well. And then essentially there's no going back, right? And so it's very messy. It's not a clean cut thing. And I found professionally and socially very unacceptable in a lot of cases to be thinking and working this way, except of course in the niche, communities where people are doing it consciously. So yeah, just want to say that.
Would you like to pivot to the Q&A? We have some really good ones in the chats. All right. I'll save my question for the end because we do get some really good ones. So we'll start with Andy. Andy, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, this seems very hard to give an elevator speech for to somebody in terms of like a 90-second explanation of what a regenerative practitioner does. And is there a way you can concisely convey the idea to others?
I try. Freya, please try as well, because indeed it's. I would say a regenerative practitioner is someone who is really interested in listening to all parts of a system and finds the healthy flows of life again and support that to come into existence, being it between relationships between humans, between their relationship with land and place, being it a relationship between or in themselves. So it's a practitioner that focuses on creating the conditions / space so that healthy relationship can be rewoven in a way. And go there where there is maybe relationships twisted, broken, interfered, to kind of see what's needed there to help the flow come into health again.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the one thing I would add to that is that I like to think of regeneration as resetting the pattern or resetting the conditions, the underlying conditions on which all of human activity takes place. So it's an upstream activity, right? It's not at the end sort of working on the symptoms of problems. It's upstream working on the root causes, which are always at a pattern level.
All right. Chris C., you had a question.
Howdy, thanks for being here. Regenesis, the way that they teach regenerative development calls us to play a role that increases a living system's vitality, viability, and capability to evolve. And I'm curious if you could give an example of how you've done that on a project that you've worked on.
I can take that because I've done a lot of work with Regenesis. Ben Hygert is a mentor of mine, and I've gone through the practitioner's training, and I've been working with Ben for the past 4 years really closely. So yeah, we've essentially Regenesis group has created hundreds of different sort of what they call meta technologies or learning frameworks for working with living whole systems and the complexities of those systems. And one of the first technologies that they use when they when they get a client or when they get a development project is to do what they refer to as a story of place. And again, a story of place is not the same as analyzing the problem space. It's getting into the histories and the unique cultures of that place. It's understanding the waterways, the nuances within the watershed or the bioregion. It's understanding, a specific community that had a tradition of whale calling to the whales, and how that city could reevaluate its approach to sustainability to allow for the whales to return, for example. And so that it's woven into a mythological sort of understanding of place. And so that's one of the first sort of technologies that in the Regenesis tradition they would use in sort of determining which aspects to focus on in their development interventions.
Would you like to add anything, Luea?
No, I think that's a beautiful example. And maybe, one thing to add is time. This is also, when we go into that state of being, then it's not just I can fix something by the end of the month or by the end of next year, but it's actually ensuring that the ripples effect really have long-lasting regenerative effects, and that may actually take generations in some cases. So it's also acknowledging what can I, within one human life, support, and do I maybe see the complete fruits blossoming up in my own lifetime, or am I? And I'm referring here, for example, to the work I'm doing with that organization called Nile Journeys. There, the vision we are having and the vision we are working towards is how to regenerate the Nile basin, and especially creating healthy relationships between the communities along the Nile. These are 11 countries. This is not something I will ever see in my own lifetime, but I can create one little piece with the work that we are now doing as an organization towards that long-term vision. So it's also acknowledging the humbleness that Freya spoke again before. What can I do as a next cycle, knowing it's maybe not the perfect solution that I aspire towards, but kind of building in stages. I think that's very crucial in that work as well.
Any follow-up, Chris?
Yeah, you mentioned TRP, and maybe it'd be helpful to just, and I went through this course, and I'm, a ongoing student of Regenesis and Carol Sanford, and for me, it has been life-changing and so uplifting for me. So would you mind maybe just talking a little bit about what you got out of the program and what you've learned on some level that might be helpful for others to hear?
Yeah, so I'm like a notoriously bad student, but the regenerative practitioners course it's a training that's done completely with like Socratic dialogue format, and it's basically different meta technologies, i.e., learning frameworks, are introduced throughout the course. I think it's I want to say it's about 100 hours of study, but you'll probably remember better than I do. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the course is that they do a lot on that, like, how are you experiencing this personally? So a lot of the frameworks you get to learn by like applying like really personal, like family scale, community scale examples too. So it's not like, okay, now let's apply this framework to understanding how to build the green wall in Africa. Like, it's not like that. It's like, let's actually get intimate with this framework by understanding how the wall between your garden and your neighbors is like a point of potential growth and regeneration, because it will allow two families to come together and interact in all of these different ways. And so you can take this framework and apply it to that scale of a situation, and then all of a sudden you have a better dynamic with your neighbors. You are there's sort of cascading ripple effect of benefits. And so I think that's one of the things I appreciate most about the course. It's not this, okay, now study up on climate change or these various technologies. It's like, these are the frameworks that you can then go apply in your job, but like to best understand them and become intimate with them, you learn them at a very personal sort of family scale level.
All right, we'll move to the next question. And when both of you were talking, the Latin phrase I quite like, festina lente, came to mind, make haste slowly. And it feels like that if you can get that balance in the meta crisis or the poly crisis, that it feels like the right approach. And it's related to Rachel's first question about the climate crisis. So for Rachel, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, hey. Thank you guys for being here. This is amazing. So exciting. Lot to dig into. So my question was about, you spoke to the urgency that kind of comes with these problems. I also see on the other end of that kind of a spectrum where there's apathy and denial, kind of like just keep on doing your day, don't worry about it. And then urgency and despair on kind of the other end. How would you start to address or use this framework to think about the end of like apathy and denial?
Maybe to say that urgency and and that drive to change things, and apathy and denial for me are actually coming from the same, meaning there has been a painful something that has not been integrated by myself or a community, and therefore there are different ways of how I respond, either with shutting down or going into overreaction mode. So actually they're talking about the same, not having the resources to even just be with what is. And for me, this is a whole game changer when we start, not only in myself through personal practice, which I feel is a core essential thing, but also as a collective capacity to build what is our collective practice to actually become more, I don't want to actually use resilient, but more open to receive what is. And that includes all the happiness and the potential, as well as that what is painful and difficult and trauma-informed patterns, etc., etc. And that for me is, in a way, a first little step, even just to build some form of resources. And from what I spoke before, also from a therapy background, you never go into a system without building first resources, that the system has some outside reference points or orientation, because otherwise you may re-traumatize it literally. And so this whole work for regeneration is to tap in that potential that is still there and has been always there, and is wanting to kind of resource the next level of health that wants to come into existence. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what would be always my, like, where's the resources that are there, and not just look, what Freya also said, at the problems.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And just to add to that, this is for me, one of the most interesting questions. Like I come from a very activist space, like urgent, times are desperate, I need to do. And so it's taken me a lot of work to actually get to a place of slowing down. But it didn't happen like just intellectually. Like one of the most meaningful things that I ever did was I sold my car and just started biking everywhere, but not because like I was a climate activist and like my car was giving off emissions, but because like I had to pay this tax on the car and it was just like sitting in the driveway and I wasn't using it. So I was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna get rid of the car. And I like used my husband's grandmother's bike for a while, and my life drastically changed, like drastically. Like all of a sudden, like I was interacting with people on the street and like saying hi to people, and there were flowers along the drive, and I was outside more, and I was like feeling the sun on my face and breathing clean air, and that's when I realized, like, yeah, like apathy and denial and like nothing I do matters, but like actually like everything I do matters so much. Like, and it was this complete reversal that was transformative, because like, and that's when I feel like that state of mind where you say nothing I do matters, I'm just a small person in a big world, even if I recycle my whiskey bottles, no one else will, and so who cares, to a place of like, no, like I'm gonna compost because like I want to do right by this little apple core, like because like I care about this apple core and like it wants to go back to the garden, right? Because like it matters, and so it's actually like you're coming from a completely different sort of point of reference, right? It's not like I'm a climate activist, I gotta get rid of my car and like be the best, like most highest integrity kind of person I can. It's like I'm in relationship with life, like I'm in love with life, and like there's no other way to be, basically. And when you can switch to that mentality, then like activism is just like happening constantly, right? Like you're in a conversation with your dad and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm like the world is changing right here in this conversation. So yeah, so that's how I would address the sort of apathy and denial versus urgency and despair. tension.
Any follow-up, Rachel? No. All right. So, Bobi, we'll end with your question.
Thanks so much, Peter. And so it's so wonderful being here in this conversation. And it feels very present for me because I'm acting similarly from inside of a system where it's often, there's so many signals coming from different places, right? And it's hard being present in a state to recognize, right, what's the best thing to do. So my question was, it's around what is your personal relationship to capitalism, and how could we make capitalism a friend instead of an enemy, and what does that look like for you? Thank you.
You want to go, Freya? Or...
I'm like an anarchist, so I can speak to that, but it's like tempting me into like really political territory. But yeah, like I guess for me, capitalism, like I guess it's like capitalism is a system of logic, right? It's not a conspiracy theory or anything like that. And the logic of the system is incredibly problematic and essentially boils down to like me or you. And we need to move from a me or you space to a me and you space, where we realize that the health of the river is connected to, you know, our own health, and our health is connected to the river. So we need to switch from a capitalistic sort of colonial mentality to one that is in, you know, a reciprocal and co-evolutionary sort of relationship with the world. And that happens in nature with the river and the mountain, and it also happens between neighbors and friends and family members. So I would not to say that I think that we need to study the logic of capitalism and be really aware of in a lot of ways, it's sort of like the air we breathe, right? And in order to understand that, you need to be a good student of your culture and a good student of your time to understand what capitalism is. And once you can start to understand it, then you can step out of that mentality and work on it responsibly. Because it's really hard to work on anything responsibly when you don't even like, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish, that kind of thing. Like you have to study these dynamics in order to be able to step out of them. But I like to think of capitalism as a system of logic that is deeply problematic and whose expiration date has definitely come.
Yeah, and just building on that, capitalism is a symptom, it's not a problem. That it came into being has previous reasons that are so long time ago that we maybe as individuals can't directly pick up, or we don't know where to read. And I think that what you spoke, Freya, is so crucial. Just even like, am I ready to have a curiosity to try to see its deeper rootstocks, and have compassion for how it came into being? There were some conditions that allowed it to come and become so big and so visible and so spread everywhere, basically. But that's just what we see. There's a whole story on many different layers that maybe also are related with some stuff that is really painful. and can we allow compassion to come also into being? And not to say I'm agreeing with capitalism, but see what has allowed it to even come to so far and where we are now. And therefore also seeing maybe what could we cultivate as other preconditions that another system of logic, but grounded in another soil, can then grow over time into something that we may not live completely or experience in our lifetime, but where we are, in a way, I love this sentence, we are the ancestors of the future. And what do we grow now that allows maybe another plant or another tree, another system to come into place.
Very short follow-up, Peter, if there's time. I was really curious about this. I really thank you for beautiful reflections, and I'm curious about this sort of hospice work, right? Coming into the compassion. So, like, what does that look like? I don't know if that's a, yeah.
Oh, that's a big one. Well, that starts with my own capacity of being able to welcome grief in my life. And then it expands of how can I grieve with others? And then it expands, can we just take the time? It's a sacred time. And in at least the culture I come from, grief is either denied or so individualized that it's happening behind closed doors. And for me, that's where it starts, to actually bring back, or not bring back, see it as an important and sacred part of the whole thing. And then if I grieve really and I go through that, transformation happens without me doing it, but just by allowing to really go through these different stages of grief that are present, that include anger, that include sadness, that include denial. But just, yeah, again, comes back for me to the capacity, can I stay with what is?
Thank you.
And one just quick thing is that, you know, there's this sense that, you know, the solutions are, you know, like are so important, and that, like, or how do I say this? Like the amount of befriending capitalism is like, you know, capitalism is a real thing, but it's also like, and it's not just going to go away immediately, but like the amount of energy and pain and work that it takes to keep this machine going is immense. And like especially in the West, we get really removed from sort of the consequences of our actions, because we buy things online and we don't know where our food comes from. And so we think that just everything like miraculously appears, but actually behind that is a world destroying machine in a lot of ways. And the amount of energy it takes to keep wars going and to, you know, perpetuate all of these sort of ills in the world is exhausting. So I just wanted to say that as well. It's like, yeah, befriend capitalism, but also like it's literally killing the world. And so it feels like we could actually like save a lot of energy by living differently.
So we do have to close this session soon because we have another session coming up right at the hour. But I wanted to close off by getting your brief thoughts on how this series can unfold here at the Stoa, and maybe talk about the session we're going to have with Daniel on Monday.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. What we sense for like early next year is that we actually would love to invite people who do practice, no matter as farmers or hospice worker or indigenous person, from the different parts of our world, and to see what are, in a way, the medicines they each bring to their community, but also maybe to that more international or global conversation we are inviting here, to kind of see each part, again, speaking from that local connection, has a medicine and a contribution to the whole to make. So emphasizing also there and entering into a more, you know, conversation and curiosity to learn from the different parts of our world.
And yes, please come on Monday to the session that we'll be holding with Daniel Wall, who is just one of the most wise and sort of knowledgeable people on regenerative development. And Luea and I will be there holding that space on Monday. So I hope you guys can make it.
Awesome. Freya, Luea, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa. That was a very lovely and beautiful session, and enriching in many different ways. So thank you for coming. And yeah, we're doing a lot of cool stuff at the Stoa, like a social design club, metagame mastermind. And I imagine like a lot of the stuff will be integrated, and how we can actually integrate this in our life and be, supported doing it with this kind of beautiful sense of community that's forming here. So I'm really excited about what will unfold. And what will unfold right now is High Pitch, Conversations in New Key. Benita Roy, Nora Bateson, Ray Beck, lots of others are going to have a really beautiful conversation, embodied conversation. You can RSVP there, and then Stoa for more events, Patreon, Substack. That being said, everyone, thanks for coming to Stoa.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Bye.